One, and we are recording with Miss Anna Perez on Thursday, January 11th, 2024 at 12:08 p.m. Eastern Time. Uh, I wanted to talk about the tunnels in New York, and I have, from I think everyone knows from one of my early episodes was with an Israeli Special Forces guy, and I love talking to him, and that one was funny as shit, and but I have always kind of backed up like, "Hey, just, like, bomb anyone that fucks with you." So it's odd for me to wanna dive into this because 'cause I've historically kinda defended Israel, and a lot of people don't like that, and that's fine. You're entitled to your own beliefs, but I do think it is profoundly odd, just like I thought it was odd that no one could talk about COVID vaccines, and that's why I got banned from YouTube and iTunes and Reddit, and no one can make fun of trannies, and that's why I'm off Twitter. I just, at the very least, I think it's curious that no one is talking about the tunnels in New York right now, and no conservative influencer. I mean, I went through yesterday, and none of them will mention it other than like a passing joke. And so to me, at the very least, I have to stay true to myself and be like, why is no one talking? Not that you're an expert on this, like you just said, like you're like, all I know is they're trafficking kids. And it's like, yeah, they're trafficking and fucking kids, and there's baby toys down there. But guys, if you go into the description, you can go find her Twitter and her Rumble channel. Anna, could you please introduce yourself to everybody?
Hi, yeah, thank you so much for having me, Tommy. Really
Absolutely.
great to be here. I'm the host of a show called, well, two podcasts, one called Wrong Think and one called Wrong Think Primetime. My show Wrong Think airs on Conservative Daily. My show Wrong Think Primetime airs on the Stu Peters Network. Both are channels on Rumble, so you can find me there if you're interested. And I also do some reporting as well. I've worked in corporate media for a while, and now I'm sort of sequestered to the dissident right, as they say. And that's funny that you bring up how a lot of people on the right were scared to talk about the whole Chabad situation. And it's true because a lot of these people, and you mentioned how they like to joke around about it, but they won't actually dig into it. They like to pretend like they're based, like they care about these things, like they're really going to dig into it. But they really walk the line because most of
Mm,
them care about being called mean names, and they just want to be, liked by everyone. They want to make sure that they can make whatever money they need to make at the end of the day. Whereas it's the people on the dissident right who are really going to be digging into this. And they don't get enough credit, I don't think. I think a lot of times they're labeled as the bad guys, when in reality, they're the ones who are risking not only their careers, but their lives to cover a
mhm.
lot of these things. So, yeah, it was a really important topic. Weird that a lot of people just, posted a meme and ignored it. But once again, they don't actually care, or at least most people don't. But what we were looking at there essentially was a series of tunnels underneath a Chabad headquarters in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. And obviously, the police arrived on the scene. They had to take the students out of the tunnels. They were standing in there when these cement trucks were trying to pour cement into the tunnels to fill them in. The police didn't actually know, or allegedly didn't know about the tunnels until they had arrived and saw what was going on. But soon after, we found out that these series of tunnels were connected to a men's bathhouse, or what used to be a men's bathhouse, which is a pretty common thing in Jewish communities. It's for ritual cleansings before and after intercourse, and other times that they might cleanse themselves. So it was a men's bathhouse. And what was so peculiar about that situation was the fact that it was actually next to there was a soiled mattress there that appeared to be a blood stain, perhaps, and also a high chair or a stroller of some sort. So kind of two bizarre things. And of course, the mattress, many people saw it on Twitter. It was actually a child-sized mattress. And we know ever a lot of people, you talk about this sort of thing and you start to wonder, okay, well, could there something be more sinister going on here? Could there be some child abuse? And then you start to read the Talmud, and then you realize what actual Jewish law entails and what it permits and what it encourages. And it's hard to not get curious about this topic. The only reason why you wouldn't look into it is because you're either somehow making money from Israel, or you're scared to upset the Jewish community, which then admits that they do have power over you in some way, which is the one idea, the one concept that so many people have been denying for so long.
Hmm. Yeah, and there's the weird concept of, like, yeah, being based, like trademark that you can't talk about anything. And I've always, I think if you were to I guess categorize every episode I've done, I would lean more on the conservative side. But like I don't give a shit about that. I've always just spoke what I truly believe, and if you like it, cool, and if you don't, cool. But I have to be at the very least true to myself at the very core. I guess it's maybe like an ego thing, but thinking the COVID vaccines were weird and getting banned from YouTube, and it always so I for like that as an example. I always thought it was for people that like him or don't like him. I always liked Rogan because he would at least talk to these people. But you would see someone like a Lex Friedman or a Tim Pool talking about how free speech was under attack and how we can't talk about it. Okay, sure. And okay, that's a good idea. But this was like 2020. 2020, I was working at a liquor store and living above my parents' garage and doing this podcast off of a laptop. And I interviewed Dr. McCullough and Dr. Malone months before they ever went on Rogan. If I can get in touch with these people, how come Tim Pool or Lex Friedman hasn't had them on? Well, now it starts to look like they like the idea of fighting against censorship, but they won't actually do anything. Okay, so that's just my own personal complaint or a chip on my shoulder. But with anything, I lost a lot of subscribers right after October 7th, and I was like, yeah, I was like, fuck them up, nuke them. Like, I don't give a shit. Again, I don't I don't care because I don't have a pre-listed set of shit that I subscribe to. And now looking at it, I have no problem, conversely, going, how come no one's talking about this? Why won't anyone touch this? Just because they're Jewish. Remove everything. Pretend it's a problem on a test. And if Tommy has 10 oranges and Anna buys 9, how many oranges does Tommy have left? Remove your ego from what it really is if we're talking about guns or divorce and who gets custody of kids or whatever. Just look at it as a remove yourself entirely and just look at it as some sort of equation and then answer it honestly. So to me, it's very just like COVID or just like no one was allowed to talk about the elections when they all stopped counting in the middle of the night, and then all the posters go up over the windows, and 100% of ballots coming in, and it's a statistical impossibility, and they all come in on pallets, and all the cameras turn off, and if you talk about it, you get banned from social. It kind of seems like a court. If you changed all of that and said this was happening in Guatemala in the 50s, you'd correctly say, oh, that's the CIA. But if it happens today, you can't say it's a coordinated coup, right? So all of these things, we get so caught up in it, and people, and maybe it's just the guy in me, but they turn into pussies. There's just this, and maybe it's I don't know, maybe it's good that I've been banned from iTunes and Reddit and Twitter and YouTube because I just don't give a shit anymore. But I think it's very fucking weird that days after the conspiracy of Epstein pretty much becomes inarguable, this is found. Tunnels with that's a blood stain. It's a poop stain. What if it's not stained at all? Why are there mattresses? Fuck all of that. Why are there mattresses in a goddamn tunnel leading to a children's museum? So at worst it's they're on a payroll. At best it's they have no spine. Do you have any real conviction on either? Not that I don't know why I'm asking you this like you have a crystal ball, but your thoughts on it?
No, I think you nailed it in the sense that it's very me, 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 me. It's all about them. And you bring up some examples of people who claim to be free speech. But here's the thing, everybody on the right, which most of these people are not right wingers at all, but anybody who claims to be conservative, they're free speech until it matters to be free speech, if you know what I mean.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that essentially is that they'll be free speech. They'll be all for it when it's easy to say so, or when it's a guest that is maybe a little bit right of center or is just talking about something slightly unpopular compared to the dominant narrative. But as soon as you start really having people on that are truly challenging the narrative and people that maybe you personally don't agree with, you can't really claim to be free speech. Like there's a lot of boogeymen in this industry. I'm sort of starting to become one myself. I'm not a big enough name where it's really affected me that much, but I know for a fact that there are certain people that won't have me on their shows or that there are certain topics that people don't want to cover with me. So I'm well aware of that. And there are much bigger names than me who have faced a very similar fate. You have Nick Fuentes for starters, you have Gavin McInnes, you have they're actually debating, I think, today, because they differ on the whole is
Mm-hmm.
on the Jew issue. But they're just good examples. And then you have other examples as well. I mean, we can go on and on and on. Even Donald Trump at the start was kind of a social pariah. Now it's becoming more popular to support him. It's becoming more
Mm-hmm.
profitable to support him. So more people are willing to, be vocal about their support for him. And that it is what it is. I mean, I'm glad he's getting more open support, but I think that there's certainly this culture of like, let's pretend we're free speech until it really matters, until it comes down to defending people that we don't agree with. Because, the real test is, will you defend someone's ability to speak out, even when not only is it unpopular for other people, but yourself as well?
Mm.
And that it'll actually make you a pariah if you associate with this person or if you defend them publicly.
Mm.
And that's where I see a lot of conservatives start to show their true colors. Once again, proving they're not conservative at all. And I've been very vocal on this issue because it's something I can personally speak to, being that I was sort of, you know, pushed out of corporate media at a very young age. I'm only 26. And at this time, I can't really work for corporate media outlets. And it's not even like they have a big sign on their door that says Anna need not apply. But what it is that I know that at a certain point, we're just going to be at odds with something and they're not going to take my side. And they're eventually going to find some creative way to push me out like they always do, because they can't fire you because then there's legal issues there. They can't formally fire you, right? Or they have to make it look good for themselves. So it's this song and dance that I hate about the conservative movement. And they like to, they're basically pretending like they care about conserving anything when they don't at all. And we saw that with the whole calendar gate situation. And their favorite excuse is, well, we have more important things to talk about. So why are we talking about this? A stupid calendar? Well, actually, it's a much bigger argument about where we're at in the conservative movement and what it means to conserve. And also, as it pertains to the whole tunnels situation, a lot of people are using the excuse, well, we don't know any definite answers. All right, but since when have journalists been one to just, wait and wait and wait and wait so they have it confirmed by the CIA or the FBI? We're never going to get that answer. And
Mm.
also, part of being a journalist is putting together, the whole point of being a journalist really is putting together pieces, connecting the dots, and presenting it to the public and saying, hey, take from this what you will, but these are the dots that I put together. These are the pieces that I've put together. And that's all we're asking from this Jewish tunnel story. Like, why can't we talk about it? Why can't we talk about the Jews? Why can't we talk about Israel? Why is it that we could talk about literally any other religion except for this particular one? You claim
Mm.
that they have no control over us, and yet it seems like they have all the control in the world if they're stopping you from talking about it.
Mm. Yeah, it's I mean, I got to early on, I got to go on Stu Peters' show, and this is like 2021, and he was saying that the COVID vaccine was depopulation, and I was arguing, I was like, I don't think it is, man. They have nuclear weapons. They could deep. 3 years later, hey, I've completely switched sides. I've interviewed enough doctors to where I'm like, hey man, Stu is right. I've had Stu on my show. We talked about his movie. He had his, I've had on both of his directors talking about These Little Ones. And I've interviewed several people that run safe houses for child trafficking. I've interviewed former special forces, former tier one forces, CIA ground branch guys. Basil Baz is one of them, who runs the Association for the Recovery of Children. This is an actual John Wick motherfucker. And if Baz is watching, I say that with love, Baz. Don't kill me. He actually goes and, I would imagine, judicially goes and rescues these kids. It's not some abstract, we're raising money for a weird. I mean, no, gets kitted up, goes into, like, crosses the border, goes to Mexico, brings body armor, throws them on the kids and leaves and smokes anyone in his way. Truly, I mean, a fucking angel on earth. And I've had them on. I've read the book, The Franklin Scandal by Nick Bryant, where they go into, in the 80s, trafficking, by the way, in the Republican Party, trafficking children and videotaping state senators at his lower level, having sex with children, primarily boys, using that for political blackmail, and from the kids' direct experiences, talking about being taken out into the woods and seeing people wearing cloaks and killing babies. I've interviewed Christy Wells from Safeway Project. or Safe House Project, who talk about specifically the darker ones are the satanic ritual abuse. Now, so as soon as you start to say these things, people start to, oh man, Tommy's going off the deep end. I graduated at UGA. I got into medical school in Miami. I turned it down. I decided not to go, but I have a great respect for science. So when I interview all these doctors, there's more of a, oh yeah, well Tommy respects and understands it. But the second I move to something else, all of a sudden that same logical deductive reasoning that I had is thrown out the window because now I'm talking about something crazy like satanic ritual abuse. You get lumped into QAnon. Well, oh no, I'm talking about actual individuals who've got to the highest level of military operations, talking about how this is what's happened, how they have rescued children to where they find menus like you would at a restaurant of what you can do to a child, or if you're old and creepy, what you can pay to have someone. And it is at the most expensive shit is satanic murder. You don't have to like that. You can exit out now and say, I've gone off the deep end. I don't I don't give a shit. It's just I'm just looking at what's happening. I'm just looking at in 2021, I'd said extensively, we're gonna find out one day that the US government or the DHS had a hand behind the social media companies, that it wasn't private companies, that it was Uncle Sam operating through this, and happened a lot sooner than I thought it would with the Twitter files. Well, now it's okay to talk about it. So the second you get caught up in the notion of I'm Democrat or I'm Republican or I'm American or I'm Canadian or I'm Tommy or I'm Anna, you have immediately put a ceiling on how far you're willing to look at things. So when it comes back to this, I think it is odd. And I lost a ton of subscribers right after October 7th because I was like, yeah, I've interviewed these IDF guys and they're just, like this guy lost his sister, this guy lost a brother. So yeah, they're fucking him up. And Tommy, you're supporting genocide in Gaza. No, I'm not. I'm just supporting this. I have no problem with also looking at facts and completely changing. Like I said, with Stu, hey, Stu is right. I was wrong. I've interviewed enough doctors, and with birth rates dropping and with miscarriages going up by something like 40,000% in Canada, yeah, it kind of seems like they're aiming at depopulation. So that whole rant is to come back to it does it at the very least, it's a curiosity that this is happening right after Epstein with tunnels, fucking tunnels. That kind of poetically, God has a sense of humor. Israel has been using as an excuse to fuck up Hamas because they have tunnels and that's not, real men come out into the light and fight. But with these, it's different. It's the tunnel. They were worshiping. They're afraid of genocide. They're subverting COVID restrictions. But it's happening right now in a community that has not a generalized community, that literal community has had problems with fucking underage kids. But it doesn't libs of TikTok. That chick was like, "Oh, these disgraceful teens. What the fuck?"
Well, the other part of the story that doesn't make sense is that apparently these tunnels were built about 6 months ago, but they also claim at the same time that these were meant to help evade COVID
COVID restrictions.
restrictions, which doesn't make sense because, COVID restrictions in New York ended over a year ago, I'm pretty sure, at least the ones that prevented you from worshiping, which, were unconstitutional. But one of the things that's so alarming about these Jewish communities is that they're kind of, because they're so sequestered in their own communities and cultures, they actually live entirely separate lives from the rest of the secular world, and that includes their own judicial system. They don't abide by the American normal judicial system. And this brings up a whole conversation about assimilation and why it's so important to have a unified culture, and why people like myself get called white nationalists for pointing this out. But this is exactly the reason why we talk about having some sort of unified, coherent uh, culture. Because what happens is you then have cultures like this that operate under the guise of religious freedom. And they say, well, you can't touch us because we're going to operate under religious freedom, which is quite rich because, Catholics, for example, they don't get that privilege because the government's constantly infiltrating the Catholic Church, right? But that's just, that's just a caveat of the argument. But beyond that, it's just a fake argument because what they're doing is they're protecting this very, covert sort of community, and they're not only allowing this to go on, but they are protecting it. They are specifically protecting this abuse. And you brought up the fact that child abuse, sexual abuse in particular, is very common within these communities. And Chabad, that's not the only sect of this of Judaism that does this. There are many, many stories. I just did a show on this where I exposed a lot of victims of sexual abuse, both young boys and young girls, and specifically in with relating to the issue of these bathhouses that I brought up earlier about how they have bathhouses. That's a very common thing in Jewish culture, especially for men. And there are several stories out there that you can find where young boys were actually sexually abused in these bathhouses and other places as well. But part of the problem is that they exist in their own world and they have their own judicial system. They have their own laws that they abide by. And when you point that out, they're like, oh, well, that's anti Semitic. When you actually read passages from the Talmud, for these are Talmudic Jews that abide by the Talmud, obviously, they call you anti-Semitic when you call out that they actually allow sexual abuse. And it's like, well, this is your religious text. If you
Hmm.
don't like it, then maybe consider don't believing in what you claim to believe. But I'm not making anything up. This is just these are the facts. This is the truth. And I remember calling a lot of this out when it came to Islam a long time ago,
Hmm.
back when it was unpopular to call out Islam, because there was once a time when you couldn't you couldn't talk about Islam either, right?
Muhammad
But it was
married
still
a 9-year-old. Yeah.
yeah, but I talked about that, especially when the whole Afghanistan withdrawal was totally failed. I had Laura Loomer on my show. I remember they weren't happy about that back when I was a host at Real America's Voice. They didn't really like that I had her on, but I had her on before she was she kind of got more famous for doing all this Trump stuff. But she's such a warrior, and she was covering that topic very well, and she was so well read on the topic, and I covered that, and that was still a little bit pushing the boundaries, but now it's totally fine to do that, right? But you can't talk about the Jews, you can't talk about the Talmud, you can't talk about they were fine, they're fine with you reading the Quran and talking about the Quran says, which doesn't say some great stuff in there either, if I'm being completely honest. But you can't talk about the sexual abuse in the Talmud. You can't read directly from it and talk about that. And I, you know what? Again, to your point, it should be about the truth. If you don't like what it says, then you don't like what it says. But don't get mad at me. Don't shoot the messenger for simply informing you of what these things say and putting piecing together the puzzle saying, well, you have these weird child items next to a men's bathhouse in a well hidden series of tunnels that they clearly didn't want anybody to find out about. Oh, and then you also have these ancient texts that if you read clearly point to the fact that they're not only allowing these things to go on, but they're protecting it. Oh, and by the way, this is also a very specific sect of Judaism where they kind of exist in their own world. So I don't know, seems a little sketchy to me. And I think that you would really have to go out of your way to ignore the story in order to not find it sketchy at all. But again, back to what you were saying earlier, that is what they're doing. They don't want to touch controversial issues. At uh, you know, um, at the worst, they're being paid off by Israel, they're being funded by Israel, and at best, they're just scared. They're just cowards, and they're scared of being called mean names and losing their ability to make money. But I said this on my show, and I'll say it again. At this point in time, when it comes to fighting the evil that is truly taking over this country, you cannot be 10% all the way in. You cannot be 20% all the way in. You cannot be 30% or 40 or 50 or even 90% in when it comes to being dedicated to the truth. You have to be 100% of the way in or else get out of the way because we
Yeah.
don't have time for people who are just, in the middle of the road being like, well, I want to post for a calendar because I'm a sexy lady and I want boomers to buy this weird product. Or I don't really want to talk about that because I just want to talk about the 2024 election or the economy or this. Shut up. Shut up. We have like 5 million people talking about that. Can you please, for the love of God, talk about something that's actually important for once and that actually will help shift the Overton window and help us take back our country? Because that's what really needs to happen.
And at the very, as Baz says, I think the first time I interviewed him, He said that, there's a lot of gray area in life. Life is almost entirely gray area. At what point can you say you stop talking to a friend, or at what point do you have to keep, I don't know, my family's great, but theoretically, at what point do you stop talking to a parent or a whatever? It's all this, that, and you follow your heart. And then, I can follow my heart. I'm single with no kids and no debt, so I can do this podcast. But if I had a family, I could say, you know what, maybe I don't like my job at the steel mill, but it's not about me loving my job. I have to provide for my kids. It all gets, sure, it's all gray area. He goes, there's no gray area with a guy in the woods who has removed the fingers from a girl so that she can't be identified when they find her body. He goes, that's evil. There is no, doesn't matter what language you speak or what religion you practice. There is no other treatment for that individual than a bullet in the head. And no one's going to stop Baz, so more power to you, Baz. But even, yeah, Islam, right? Well, that's insensitive if you talk about how Muhammad married a 9-year-old or a 6-year-old or whatever it was, or how it really is it's a death cult, right? But if you shift that and you talk about anything else, yeah, I would argue that the reason why we can talk about them is because those countries sit on hundreds of trillions of dollars of petrochemicals and lithium, so we can, keep making our electronics and fight China, and Israel doesn't. So that's possibly another reason why we don't go. Same reason we don't invade Canada. There's nothing fucking there. But with this, it is, you just look at it and you go, why can't you talk about it? And even if it's almost better to be on the payroll of the Mossad, because at least you're getting something, right?
Right.
At least you're getting money or posing for that calendar. You know what? But if you're just going, hey, I don't give a shit about this movement, I'm just making money. Part of me almost, I don't respect it, but I respect it more because you're like, hey, dude, I'm paying my bills. All right, in theory, I kind of get it. But if you're cucking for them and you're not even making money, what is that? That is, you're not even getting anything. You're just spineless.
Well, yeah, but it is about self-preservation to some degree too. So it's the
Sure,
prospect of not being able to profit off of anything. And that's really what a
sure.
lot of these people fear because they don't necessarily need to be making a lot of money at this moment in any particular way, but and they see it as, well, I might want to run for office one day, or, well, I don't want to be, I don't want to be a social pariah. I don't want to lose my friends. A very feminine mentality, actually, but it's quite interesting because I haven't just seen this mentality among women in the industry, but rather men as well. But it's all about self-preservation. A lot of them run media businesses. They don't want to be seen as the bad guy or controversial. Like they'll walk the line just enough. And this is the part I hate. They'll walk the line. Like you brought up a good point about like posting memes about it because they want to seem like, oh, well, I'm touching on it. Don't worry, but they won't actually dig into it. They won't actually investigate it. They won't actually ask the important questions. And what that's all about is self preservation. And there's the other aspect of it, which is that they don't want to be wrong, right? And the reality is, anytime you speak out publicly about an issue, you run the risk of being wrong. However, you should have the humility to be able to admit if you were wrong. And I have no problem doing that. And nobody should have a problem doing that. But there's a lot of people who are scared, so scared of that, so scared of having to admit that they're wrong that it prevents them, because there's always, you always run the risk of being wrong on any number of issues. We're all, just putting together the pieces. It looks to be a certain way, and I'm not just talking about any specific story, I'm just talking in general. And we, like, for example, the vaccine, we're seeing a lot of deaths. Could it have been possible that maybe it was just a fluke? Yeah, I guess it could have been. Anything's really possible. I mean, it didn't look like that at all. I mean, now we know it's definitely that wasn't the case. It wasn't a fluke, it was intentional.
Mhm.
But my point is that, like, there's also this fear I think that they have of, well, I don't want to have to, like, you know, admit that I was wrong later on. And that's wrong too, because you should have the humility to say, look, I
Yeah,
thought it was this and I was wrong, and that's that, you
yeah,
know? And I did my best to put together the pieces. If you really are investigating something thoroughly, then, 8 to 9 times out of 10, you're going to be right,
yeah,
but you always run that risk. And I think that's part of it too. People just aren't humble. It's all about self preservation. It's just cowardice, really,
yeah,
is what it boils down to.
yeah. No, I mean, and that's kind of the beauty of doing 1,400 episodes is all of my incorrect takes are preserved in high quality video on multiple platforms, and I couldn't remove them if I wanted to. So I'm forced to be humble. And there's nothing. There's nothing wrong with saying I'm wrong. You you fucked up. For all I know, in a year, you and I are going to be looking back going, I cannot believe that those weren't Jewish tunnels, that that was actually Switzerland or some shit. Like, oh,
Yeah.
goddamn, I was fucking wrong, man. Like, and that's okay. But
Hmm.
to not to not even want to get close to it is there's just such a 9/11. All right. A year before, PNAC, the Project for a New American Century, right? Written by a lot of high-powered people in the United States saying, paraphrasing, absent a cataclysmic event in Lower Manhattan, the United States will not be able to do what it wants in a new world. It's the Project for a New American Century. Okay. Dick Cheney is the former CEO of Halliburton and KBR, Kellogg Brown and Root, which is the largest war reconstruction contract. We always think about defense contractors making weapons. There's also reconstruction. Okay, and then this happens on 9/11, and it's the one time in the 70-year history that NORAD doesn't have weapons on the planes, and they're also running Operation Vigilant Guardian the morning of September 11th, 2001, where theoretically a bunch of civilian planes are hijacked and flown into towers, so that when it actually does happen, you have a bunch of pilots saying, "Is this real world or is this exercise?" Well, what happened? Who did it? Was it Madagascar? Was it Guatemala? No, it was Afghanistan and Iraq who they also sit on top of a quadrillion dollars of oil, and that's also a reason for us to put a bunch of bases on top of the 710 bases we already have around the world, somewhat close in proximity to China and Russia, and are denying them assets. I didn't do this. I was 11. I'm just pointing out truly what happened. It just, you don't have to like it. I don't have to like it. I'm not cheering this on. Clearly, I love the United States and what the flag at least stands for. I didn't do any of that. It just is what it is. When it first happened, I was like, this is a Chinese bioweapon. I was like, motherfucker. The more you look at it, you start to see patents from Moderna going back to like 2014 or UNC Chapel Hill, I think in 2016, and you start seeing us gearing up through Detra and BARDA having all these things for like the new war will be a bioweapon war and how we need to decouple from China. And I think in 2004, some admiral giving a speech at the Pentagon about how, we have $700 billion a year in funding for the DoD. We only need 600. So for the last 100 billion, what we can do slowly is start sequestering that. So over 20 years, we have an extra $2 trillion. So, and this is the line from 2004, so that in the summer of 2024, we can be ready for a war with China in the Taiwanese Strait. I didn't do that, but now it starts to look like we did COVID. And in a year, who knows what I'll be saying then? There's nothing wrong with being wrong. There's also nothing wrong with just putting together puzzle pieces. I didn't do any of this shit. I was 11. I'm just looking at this. Don't shoot the messenger. And so one of my best friends is Jewish, and we always joke about, going all in on like, oh, it's the Jews. And in the last 3 days, I've been texting him. I'm like, Drew Bob, what did you do with these tunnels? And he's not practicing. He's like, I don't know. He's looking at it. And I'm like, yeah, they're saying it's for COVID restrictions. And he's going, why are there mattresses in there? And I was like, what? And I was looking at it, and we're going back and forth. And I text him tomorrow. I was like, or yesterday, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna cover it tomorrow. And he's like, welcome to the dark side. I was like, Drew Bob, I swear to God, if you're involved in this shit. And he's like, Tommy, you're about to lose even more subscribers. Now you're going after the Jews. But
You know,
again, it's yet I just want to find out what's going on. And I think
yeah.
it's weird that you can't
Well, I think you brought up a good point earlier, which is that you have to sort of remove yourself and look at it for
entirely.
what it is. Like, it's the same thing with me and, illegals, for example. People are like, well, aren't you a migrant? And I'm like, well, first of all, no, I'm from, I'm Southern European, uh, and I'm second generation American. So no, not even at all close to South American or even Mexican, for that matter. So, but that's besides the point. But even if I was, I would still have a right to speak out about this issue because it's a real problem. And, you should be able to remove yourself in the sense that you shouldn't take these things personally and you shouldn't, or even the refugees from Cuba, for example. I'm technically Cuban. That's where my family lived for the generation before they came here, only for about a generation. But that's like when they were coming over, when they were there was the refugee issue. I was actually like, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't be taking in refugees from anywhere, really. Maybe right now we should just like, chill with that maybe we should have a bit of a, immigration moratorium, regardless of where they come from. Cuba, it doesn't matter if it affects me. And people would be like, well, aren't you Cuban? Don't you care? I'm like, no, I care about America. I was born in this country. My family has lived here for generations. I'm not going to sit here and like simp for another country that I've never even been to. That's insane. And like I see the value in keeping this country as close to our cultural and ethnic roots as close as possible, meaning, our European Christian roots. There's value in that. And of course, there's, destruction that they're intentionally bringing by allowing these people in. Anyway, that's just an example. Another example is I talk about how I do believe that the baby boomers kind of destroyed conservative culture. If you look at the whole situation historically, and you don't know how many boomers come after me and say, that's really rude. I'm a baby boomer and I don't think that, or like, I don't, I'm like, look, I don't care what you are. I don't care if you're a baby boomer, Gen Z or Gen Xer. This is generally speaking. And yeah, there are exceptions to every rule. And my whole criticism of the baby boomer generation is funny because I talk about how it's all me, 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 me. That's how they think, generally speaking. And so all they're doing is vindicating me
Yeah,
when they talk about how, well, that doesn't describe them. And I know there's probably going to be people in your comments that are going to say like, well, I'm a baby boomer and that's not me. I'm not selfish. And it's like, well, you
you
did
kind of,
just make this general comment about yourself. And
yeah.
I'm talking about trends in history and political movements. I'm not talking about individual people. But yeah, I mean, you have to really remove yourself if you're willing to find out the truth, because the reality is there are some, immutable characteristics, for example, your ethnic background or whatever it might be. And there might be information that is inconvenient to that truth about yourself, but that doesn't necessarily speak about you specifically. And so you need to be able to remove yourself from the situation, or else it just becomes, the Anna show or the Tommy show. Like it's all just about whatever is convenient for you to believe, and you're not living in reality. And that's,
Mhm.
been a huge detriment to every movement. If you're not able to take yourself out of it, then get out of the way and stop speaking about it. Stop, drawing attention to it, because it's just about you at that point.
Mm.
And you see that with Jews a lot too. Like they, even people who aren't practicing, they'll still get mad when you talk about the tunnels, for example. And it's like, but you yourself admit that you're not Jewish. So why are you so upset when I talk about this?
It's because it's a hop. My buddy Drew Bob, who is like Jewish technically, he'll always say he'll be like nobody hates the Jews more than the Jews. He's like they're the perfect shield, and it is. Listen, man, it is brilliant. And again, this is from I've done more shows defending Israel and lost more subscribers because of that. So it's not even like this is a traditionally like it's the fucking Jews pod. No, this is the antithesis of that. And I've had on guys that I don't agree with. I've had on several times now, and I've gone on his show. And why do I keep having him on? Because he's respectful to me, and I'm respectful to him. And when we do shows, we'll finish, and he'll always email me and be like, he'll be like, "Thank you, young man, for." He's like, "I know you don't agree with me, but thank you for having me on." I'm like, "Yeah, Dr. Kevin Barrett, I have had on a million times." And the last one he came on, I had him right after October 7th, and he talked about how it was there's a stand down, or which if you look into it, it's not a whole lot different than 9/11. There's a stand down order, and he goes into how the Jews did 9/11 and JFK and on and on and on. I don't agree with all of that, but sitting there and listening to him, I was like, I have to at least hear him out. And if it's such a live wire that you can't touch it, I want to know why it's a live wire and why you can't touch it. Now it's not controversial because he's coming on and it's not like I'm having someone on talking about why they love kids or why they want to, shoot up a school. I'm not that one that's illegal, but I'm not gonna
Mm.
I'm not gonna air that. I'm not gonna have someone because it's inciting violence. Those are truly the two rules for any of the streams I always do. I always tell people no pedophilia, no inciting violence. You can't fucking do that. But other than that, there's no reason why I can't have someone on and why I can't hear. It doesn't reflect me to give someone the time of day. I want to hear you.
Hmm.
And if they make a fool of themselves, they're just making a fool of themselves and they're kind of outing themselves for what they are, right? So
Yeah.
it just it comes back to that where again it's just ego. Now, if I want to do an episode about like what I believe, I'll do an episode with friends and we'll get drunk and talk shit. But that's what it is. The episode will be titled like bullshit. It's what you're getting when you come into it. But to air something as again conservative trademark, where I mean the libs of TikTok, these disgraceful teens or Tim Pool, if you're avoiding COVID restrictions by building tunnels based, what the fuck? Why can't you touch it? And if I
Yeah.
touch it, I'm an anti-Semite. I just I don't know. I know we're kind of going in circles with that, but at the very least, I guess the silver lining is nothing has really outed people more than I would say this. People that you always kind of suspect, like, hey, they're just walking the line for this, or they don't want to go into for that. It has never been so clear cut that I mean, really, it's kind of like the morning after the election when it's like
Yeah.
the counting stopped, and then immediately for the first time on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter, you start getting those little faggoty blue banners that are like the 2020 election has not been fucking certified by the AP. You're like, this seems pretty coordinated.
Yeah.
This is just so wildly coordinated and either not talking about it or, like you said, a little fun meme. They're like, hey, look, I guess the Jews are behind it all again. And
Yeah.
then on to the next thing. I don't
Yeah.
know. And
Well,
it's
you
that
bring up a really good point. It is an interesting time because it's separating the boys from the men, so to speak. And I think that it really is showing people the true colors of people within this movement. And it's also sparking debate over what conservatism even means. Now, we can all disagree on things. In America, we have this beautiful thing called diversity of thought, or so we were supposed to have it. Obviously, the left for so long kind of hijacked that hope. But for the most part, it still does exist compared to other regions of the world. And so, with that said, nobody's saying that you can't have opposing viewpoints to mine or somebody else's, but can you please label them correctly? That's the biggest complaint I think that I have is, what it means to be conservative has been completely redefined in general. And I think that we need to actually stay true to who we say that we are so people know where we're coming from. And so that these movements don't become, I don't want to be a big tent movement. I don't want to be a big tent party. But that's what we've become because we've just allowed everything and everyone to be a part of this, of the movement. And it's like, then it defeats the purpose of being a movement at all. It's kind of like having a country with no borders, right? So, it's like, I'd like to have a larger conversation with that within the movement, maybe, restructuring some things. But that conversation is already being had because we're starting to see a lot of these people show their true colors, who they really are. Oh, it's really based to build these tunnels to, evade COVID restrictions. Or is it really? Or are you just ignoring a much bigger story that's going on here? And are you just covering up for the fact that you're not actually willing to dig into that story because it's inconvenient to your agenda, which actually has nothing to do with conservatism at all? And so, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting time, and it's also interesting because we're actually in a way winning. The right is kind of winning right now because you look around at what's going on and the people who are controversial and the things that they're saying. You could never even talk about. You could never even mention. 10 years ago, even Israel, for example, like for the first time ever, I'm actually seeing maybe not the whole Jewish question, but certainly the Israel problem. For the first time ever, I'm seeing mainstream conservatives starting to question Israel and say, maybe it's not the best idea to just give them whatever weapons and resources they want. Maybe it wasn't the best idea to just tell Bibi Netanyahu he could have whatever he want and that he's our greatest ally. That's a big step because 10 years ago, you'd be done. You'd be just done if you did that.
yeah.
And then when it comes to, the neocon problem, like for the first time ever, we're opposing, especially on the conservative side, these war hawks that are wanting
Mm.
to go to war and give all our money away to these random countries just because of Russia, big bad Russia, which most people are just brainwashed to think is a terrible country because their lack of geopolitical knowledge and they see it as a Soviet era nation when we're no longer in that time period, obviously. But that's another subject. But the point is, there's a lot of issues that a lot of people are waking up to. Even Donald Trump, he's been instrumental in this. Whether or not you like him, the reality is we didn't have a president who spoke about the deep state prior to Donald Trump.
Oh
And
yeah.
then Donald Trump gets up there and he starts talking about the deep state. That's a big move.
It's
You
insane.
know, look, we're winning as it pertains to we're starting to drag the Overton window
Yeah.
back to its rightful position, and we're starting to bring free speech back to some capacity. We still have a long ways to go, but there is a silver lining, and that silver lining is that We couldn't even have these conversations. You couldn't even talk about many of these topics 10 years ago.
That is a good point. Yeah, no. To say deep state before 2016 was, on par with, Area 51 or Bob Lazar or JFK. And now it's you can see the Overton window shifting. It's like, all right, granted, a bunch of unelected political elite in the senior executive service and Northrop Grumman are calling the shots, and we're doing dragnet surveillance with a dystopian supercomputer in Nevada. That being said, do we have to blame the change? Like, Jesus, it really is. That is a good point. Is it's shifting, and yeah, you can't. I think maybe the wildest thing I've seen, and I know we got to wrap this up in a minute, but I think that maybe the wildest thing I've seen is the number of people I've had on here, former Delta Force, former Navy SEALs, former Green Berets, former whatever you want, when they are coming out, and unprompted, it's not like I'm coaxing them along and they like me, so them saying unprompted, my sons aren't going to fight in the military for perpetual wars over nothing. Or one of the guys I've had on before, Clay Martin, and his buddy Joe Kent, who's running for Congress. Joe Kent was in Special Forces training on 9/11. He lost his wife to a suicide bomber in Syria. She was a linguist. And they talk about their mindset going over there. It was like fucking kill them all. They did this too. Where you look at what Joe Kent's tweeting now, and if you just removed his name and his background and just looked at the tweet, it would look like a liberal tweet from if Twitter was around in 2004. It's we're kicking back money to defense contractors, and we're going to kill a bunch of people who had nothing to do with anything in the United States. You look at Clay Martin, I've had him on here, is fucking funny as shit. But he goes in there and he talks about, he goes, when I first went over there, it was kill them all. He goes, and now I look back at it and I look at how they view us and how we're cheering on, the defamation of Christianity, and we have guys in thongs dancing in front of children with a neon sign that says it won't lick itself. And he goes, I used to wonder why these old men would take a sniper rifle from their great grandpa with sandals from their dad and fight a military with relative god tier technology with satellites and F-35s. And I go, what are they doing? And he goes, and now I see now I have the same disgust that they have, and I completely get it. And I go, you know what? They look at us as you're coming and you're ruining my family. To me, that is the wildest. It's one thing to have some, I don't know, Bernie Sanders or Cheech and Chong motherfucker be like, war's wrong, man. It's like, yeah, you don't live in the real world. Might makes right. It's another thing to have these grizzled special forces veterans that could kill me with probably everything in this room and you somehow through the screen, to
Mhm.
have them come out and talk about the military industrial complex, forever wars, the needless slaughter of civilians. That is the craziest shit I've ever seen. And Dale Comstock, I've had him here a million times before. Fucking Delta Force talking about don't fall for these things. Don't fall for these appeals to patriotism and emotion is the wildest shit I've seen. So I don't know. Maybe it's not for naught. But lastly, and I guess we'll kind of wrap it up with this is, again, I don't respect it. They're not touching a topic. Maybe you're trying to make money. I don't respect it. It's the wrong place to do that. If you want to do that, go in a bit, whatever. But to not touch something like the tunnel story, and the implication though is there are children involved, but to still avoid it, that's far worse than cowardice. That's complicit evil. There's the sin
Mhm.
of commission, and I went to Catholic school for 12 years. They pounded it into me. There's the sin of commission, and there's the sin of omission. The sin
Mhm.
of commission is if I put a gun to your head and rob you. The sin of omission is the guy next to me who watches me rob you and goes, I don't know, Anna. I don't know, Tommy. I don't want any part of this. You're just as complicit. So it's one thing if you don't want to talk about a story. It's one thing. And I even that I don't respect. You know, I'll talk about trannies all day long and the suicide rate. Why? Because I'm coming up on the 10-year anniversary of my older brother's suicide. Trust me, I don't like talking
Mhm.
about suicide
I'm
either. But
sorry.
I thank you. But I will.
Mhm.
To not touch this. Hey, you don't want to talk about Jews or that? That's one thing. Child-sized mattresses. baby high chairs and to go, well, this is kind of based. That is far, far worse than cowardice. So, not to end on a super heavy note, but that's kind of my 2 cents on that is it's not cowardice, it's complicity in evil. So, fuck them.
Yeah,
Anyway,
it tells you how far people will go to walk the line for self-preservation. And like I said, you got to be 100% all in with the truth or get out. You're either with us or you're against us at this point. There's
yeah.
good and there's evil, and there's really no gray area, as we were
Yeah.
talking about before,
Yeah. And I
at least
think
right
in
now.
yeah. And I think in one of the comments in the video I told you where I first saw you was you're at the national, talking to the National Guard at the border, and you're like, don't you know this is an active invasion of military age men and you're just giving them like don't you think that's a bit harsh? And you're like, all right, faggot. And one of the comments was like, why are you using that word? And then like the comment under that was like, she's talking about military age men invading our country and you're worried about faggot. Like you're a faggot.
Yeah. Well,
But that is
you're a faggot
yeah,
for
exactly.
worrying
It was
about
just
that.
like it's just like why would you say that when they're doing it's like dude, there's it's like if I put a gun to
That
your
was a
head.
mean word.
Yeah, yeah. That's like I put a gun to Anna's head and Anna goes, "What you do it, faggot? You really gonna pull the trigger?" And someone's like, "Anna, that's a bad word." He has a gun to her head, and it's like, "Anna, let's be
I know.
polite. Let's be polite to the men executing and raping you, okay?"
Literally,
Jesus.
that's a perfect way of putting it.
That's the
That's so
fucking
accurate.
I saw that diverting meme where it's like the sunshine and rainbows or the castle covered in clouds and it was save Western civilization and be called a racist, do nothing, be killed in a government death camp and still be called a racist. Your choice.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I am. But guys, please go in the description. Please go follow her on Twitter, on Instagram, and on Rumble. And Anna, thank you so much for coming on here.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Guys, thank you for watching.